Hi, Dom.
Hi.
So we're sitting here, and I'm super happy that we get to sit together and
Yeah.
talk because you're one of the most important, special people in my life.
Right back at you.
Thanks, buddy. And I value your opinion so much that I thought we would talk over a solo that I did from last March at Oncorio.
Yeah.
Instead of me just talking to myself. So, first question: when we talk about solo work in general and how it differs from dancing in a group piece. Do we treat them differently, or should they be, completely on the same neutral ground?
I don't think it's a matter of treating them differently. I think they are very different. It's a different processes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say no, that we don't treat them differently in the way that, you know, we both know kind of like to be a team, you really have to, everyone has to pull their weight, and it's a process, but it's also, it also depends if we're talking about, whether we're choreographing a routine, whether we're dancing in a routine. If you're doing a solo work and you're choreographing it, which in your case, that was what it was,
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more on you. We might, we'll make different choices, especially if we're, especially if it's especially if we're talking in our case your work, in the process, because
My opinion is a part of it.
Yeah,
completely. Yeah.
it's your process rather than kind of a group piece. Yes, you still think about what you want out of it, but there's also a kind of, you look at it as what can we get from it as a community, like what can we get from it as, what can I get from the other people in the group? How can I feed that? Like how can I feed off of that? And I think it's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. When I did start the process of choreographing, the only person I was worried about was myself.
Yeah.
It was kind of nice, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, when we work as a duet, as a trio, as a group, we get so much more inspiration from the other people around us. So there's that balance of, is it only about my opinion? And if I'm the choreographer, is that the only opinion that counts?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And and you mentioned, if it shouldn't be different when we look at group and solo work, but it is.
It is.
It is naturally because there's only one person on stage.
Yeah.
When you watch solo work, it doesn't have to be mine, anything at all. Do you find that the stage lacks a certain element?
No, I think that really depends on the dancer.
Cool.
If I'm focusing on a self-choreographed piece, all audience members have different opinions about what they like to watch. So someone could watch a certain soloist and their choreography and say, "Oh, I completely loved it. I could keep watching it for days."
Mm-hmm.
And someone else could be the complete opposite and say, they could commend the person. I think you always have to commend a soloist doing their own choreography because it takes courage, and we all know that from a dancer's point.
Cool.
But yeah, I think that there's nothing wrong with not liking something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how we learn, and that's how we, as choreographers ourselves, create choices or dive into things by exploring different perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that it does take courage to stand up there completely vulnerable and say something by yourself. With the community of the other dancers around you while you're in a group piece, maybe ones that you did when you were doing your degree in school, or even back to our competition days at Leeming, was there a sense that we had to pull everybody together to get the story to go to the audience? Or could you lean back a bit and be like, okay, well, maybe that person will drive the story and I can just sort of sit?
No, interesting question. I think personally, I dislike kind of the idea of not putting my full heart and soul and sweat and everything, like, and thinking about, I'll sit back and rely on, the performance quality of the person that's, the lead in this piece.
Totally, yeah.
And even as a teacher, I dislike that too when I see students kind of lack that. But I do know a lot of people that do, even if they don't try, they psychologically, like, they do kind of work a little bit harder, if they are a feature or if they are at the front. I don't know. I think as a dancer, of course, when you have kind of a lead character, you think about it differently, but definitely. I don't think that you commit more or commit less. I don't think it's a matter of commitment. I think it's a matter of just assessing your role in the position and just knowing your place in the dance and knowing that every place has their place. So
yes, yeah, I definitely think, like you said, you analyze the fact that if you're in the front, quote unquote, or carrying some kind of storyline in the dance, you have that little bit of extra pressure. So some people take that and run with it and say, oh yeah, this is my role and I'm at the front. And I think in my case, I saw that pressure and knew that if I wasn't on my game, I would feel very disappointed in myself. Maybe not the other dancers wouldn't care at all, or maybe they would be mad at me, right? So you have that extra knowing that there is a kind of...
There's a different pressure.
Imbalance, exactly. Yeah, definitely different. But, when I was watching, other dances when I was younger and I saw Emma Portner being a lead in a dance, she had that. And I could see that she took the role seriously, less than the placement of where she was in the dance. Like formation wise, maybe. Like I think her, just as an example, her like maturity with that was very professional. Versus some other dancers that I've worked with who think that front and center roles are more for ego and more for, because they did the best in class one day. And this is very competition based, but I think it still carries on into professional world. And we've had a good sort of history of learning about the different kinds of relationships between dancers and who, commits more and who doesn't. And as teachers, of course, too.
I think for myself, at times, I didn't always set an expectation of, am I going to get a specific role? And maybe that was why sometimes I kind of just like stayed at a, whatever place I was, I kind of, rolled with it. But I feel like even if someone doesn't get the role that they want, it's still, yes, you're allowed to be disappointed, but just assessing your place and knowing that you still have a lot to learn from whatever role you're in.
Totally.
And I also think, taking this in a different way, as a teacher, I always like try to express, imagine also like dancing in a circular stage, when there's concerts and all this, like when the audience is all around. That totally shifts your mentality because you say, no one's in the front, no one's in the back. People are on stage, people are putting on a performance.
Completely.
And that, yes, there might still be like a lead character or whatever, but someone might be watching your back. How can you perform with like an intriguing back?
Completely, yes, yeah.
So it's just, but I think that's also the difference between when you start getting to more professional dancing rather than kind of the studio dancing, because studio dancing, you don't get many opportunities where, in life, you don't get many opportunities where the stage is a circular stage. Like it's usually, but for site specific stuff, it's not always frontal.
Totally.
So.
Yeah. And it creates a different atmosphere when you watch as an audience member. I like the idea of thinking of like no small roles in anything. And when we look at pieces that are in the round or versus frontal. If a soloist is standing in the middle of a circular stage, certain parts of the audience gets to see different kinds of different body parts, different orientations of their body.
Yeah.
And I think I haven't had much experience within the round. I think that's really interesting because most of it is so frontal.
Yeah.
There's a divide from this person on stage and then the audience.
Yeah.
So how does a soloist look at a circular stage and make sure that they're still performing?
I think you can't have too many expectations of yourself in the way of thinking, I want every single person, no matter where they are in the room, to get the exact same feeling, because the thing is that from that circular stage point of view, everyone's getting a different, like, physical perspective of you. So
it's funny because that stresses me out.
Yeah.
That makes me feel like a quarter of the audience only gets to see exactly what I wanted them to see at all times.
And the thing is that I totally right now I feel like I'm speaking as though I'm like as though I'm the audience member and I'm trying to talk to the performer and say, don't worry, you know, like you're great and all this. But then after I do start to think, oh, if I was that performer, how would I feel? Of course, I'd be thinking the exact same thing. That stresses me out. I don't know if everyone's going to get what I want them to get. But I think that's also the great thing about being a performer is that as much as there's like greatness in having like an opinion and a desire to kind of show you what your view is of what you're doing to all the audience members, sometimes you have to kind of let your own opinion go, you know, like your own kind of ego go, especially when you're dealing with that kind of stage. So
yes.
Yeah.
And that ties back to what we were talking about where, you know, is it about ego and your personal opinion?
Yeah.
I feel like as dance changes and evolves, as it always does, sort of every like 5 years or so, I feel like this conversation would probably be different.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe that's why we keep things, you know, with the border, with the proscenium stage, because you never know when you're sitting in the round if you're going to miss something.
Yeah.
With the solo I did that has been shown here, like it took me maybe 2 weeks to choreograph. So setting that deadline for myself was nice, but I wanted to show people what was happening, but I couldn't really.
Yeah.
Mostly because of some copyright issues, but like just making sure that I was able to promote the piece in some way as a part of Ryerson. So that's something to think about for next year as I go into more pieces and figure out what that means for the show when you see it as a final project.
Yeah. You know, sometimes as a dancer, and especially if you're not the choreographer, sometimes you're not always thinking about, oh, am I going to bring an audience, you know, like about the audience. You're really thinking, okay, I'm the dancer. My part is to perform to the best, you know, whereas if you're someone that's, you know, that's the dancer, that's the choreographer, that's the manager, that's the lighting, the social media, everything.
Costume,
that's when people are really, you know, but maybe as dancers, maybe we do need to start kind of thinking, how can we help the people that have kind of the lead on promoting this show? How can we help within our own place? You know, like how can we help the community feel welcome within the process? Or, you know.
Yes.
So
that's all I have to ask.
Yeah.
I think that was good. Thank you so much for sitting with me.
Thanks. It was awesome.
Long overdue, I feel like.